Hello students, today we will be learning fifth experiment of mobile application development lab, that is to write an activity with two buttons, start and stop, and on pressing on start button the activity must start the counter by displaying numbers from 1 and the counter must keep on counting till we press the stop button. So that UI application looks like this. It should have text view counter application, another text view counter value, and start and stop two buttons. So let's go and start with it. So create new project, empty activity, next counter application, finish. Go to activity main.xml. I will take just design option. It's enough. I'll minimize this resources because we have nothing to include from external images or audio. I'll use the same text to print the first one, that is counter application. I've already selected. Go to the attributes, scroll down almost to the bottom. Here it's hello world. I will write it as counter application. If you want, you can change the color and font size. Okay, so we have written counter application. I'll just open here component tree. I just want the same thing again, which is a text view. So if you want, you can go to palette, take a text view and drag it here, but you can also copy paste. So see here, there are two text views. So I will drag one to the bottom. Okay, what is our second text view that it has to tell? It is counter value. So I'll go to this. There are two ways that I can change the attributes. That is, I will go to split option here. Counter application is the name. So I just want that to become counter value. Okay, sorry. Why? Because this got highlighted, so that respectively it is changing. I'll retain the first one same. I'll change the second one. So this has got highlighted. I will change its value. Counter value, I've changed its text name. Since let it be the font size little lesser than what we have the main heading. So I will make it 20 SP. And you have to make a note that its ID is text view. Now add button to the activity area, that is go to common, take the second one, select and drag it to the activity area. And once I have taken, I'll just minimize it and add the constraints to all the 4 walls of activity area, which we call it as parent. Once added, I just want to change its value to start. So let me go with this. Click on this. The button is selected and here I want start. and button ID respectively, I will change as button start. Okay, I just need one more. So I'll just open component tree. Have the button, Control C, Control V. You can see there will be two buttons. It will be overlapping. Just hold and drag one to the bottom. Okay. So two text views, two buttons. Go to the second one now. Since this is highlighted, the code respectively is here. Both text is start now. So I will change this to stop, and at the same time the ID is start to, I will change this to stop, so that when we are doing relatively with respect to these buttons, we can have a reference IDs properly. So I will call this button stop. So this completes the UI design of counter application. When we look into this UI design, we have to map or reference IDs that is required in Java is for this text view. For first time, we are relating the Java code with respect to some text view. Why? Because every time the counter has to get incremented and it has to be printed. In this, instead of counter a value, it will be incrementing and displaying in this place. So we require this in Java code and with respect to this two buttons. So basically we will be using this three reference IDs. So creating respectively in Java, we having button, I will call it as B start and B stop. Next, since that is a text view that is counter value, I will write text view. Using this class, we will create one object that is, I will call it as CT, counter text. And I will also use one Boolean value, which I will make it as public Boolean. I will call that R, which I will set starting false value, telling the application is not running. That is counter value has not yet started. And since I need some counter to get incremented always, I will use public int C, which I will initialize to 0. So two button reference IDs, one text view. Why? Because we have to change it every time and it has to be printed on that text view, and application, which if counter is not yet started, R will be set to false. It is at the starting value, and int C is equal to 0 because counter will start from 0, or we have initialized to 0. It will start from 1. Link this B start, B stop and CT with respect to XML code IDs that we have just noted when we started with Java, before starting with Java code. So how to link this? We have B start is equal to button call find view by ID and for which we are linking with r.id.b start. It will auto suggest. So select B start, semicolon. And since it is a button, we will also set on click listener for this. So B start dot set on click listener of this. Next, similarly do it for B stop also. B stop is equal to button call find view by ID method and this keyword and B stop dot set on click listener method. This is for referring, right? So I will change this to r dot id dot for which I am referring to or linking to, it is button stop. Two buttons we have linked and also set the method set on click listener, but text view is also there. So we will complete that also. CT, that is counter text, is equal to, since we are doing with text view, use that. And call find view by ID method r dot id dot for which we have to do, that is for text view. Why? Because I showed you there that particular ID was text view. You can see here when I click here, it is text view. Where the counter application, if I click here, that is text view too. So that is why I have taken text view here, which is counter values ID in XML. This forces to have an interface to implement. So just single click on that. It will throw an error. Select the second one. Click OK. You can see the implements is added. I'll just go to presentation mode so that it can be more clarity. Okay. So once this has been done, it will also have invoke on click method also. In on click method, what we are supposed to do? That is, we have to check whether the button pressed is B start or B stop. How to check that? Use if condition. If V dot equals to the object, which one? B start. What are we supposed to do? We have to call counter start method, which is we are defining it. We'll call counter start method. We will define it. Else what it has to do? Else it has to call, that is, else it is obviously B stop method, but still we will check with it. Else if V dot equals is equal to B stop. So if this is the case, we will call counter stop method. Counter start and counter stop are something that you can use when you are using two words. You can always have a capital word instead of space, which is invalid. So counter start and counter stop methods are not defined yet. So what we will do, we will write the definition of it. So it will throw an error. Click on this and you can have the create method counter start in main activity. So it is here, and same thing we will do it for counter stop. Why it is not showing is because here void is highlighted. So just click escape key and now single click on this. It will throw an error. Select first one. So we have the method, and here we will define counter stop first. So when counter stop button is pressed, that is B stop button is pressed, what should happen? What should happen? That is, the application was running, so it is stopped. So what we have to do is we have to set the boolean r value to false. So that is our first thing. And then when we have stopped, again pressing stop button is not correct, right? So two things we will do. We will enable the B start button and disable the stop button because we have already pressed it. So how to do that? B start dot. We have a method called set enable, so that we will be using set enabled is equal to true. That means if we have stopped, the next turn is to click on B start. Next, B stop button dot set enabled false. So three things we are doing. We are setting the boolean false because we have stopped the counter, and B start button we are enabling because user can click start to restart the counter. And once we have pressed the stop button, again we will disable that button so that user cannot use the B stop button again until they click on B start button, that is start button. So the same thing we will do in counter start also. I will use the same 3 lines here. What is the difference? When I start the counter has started. So I will set this dot r is equal to true. Okay, next. B start dot enable. Once you have pressed the start button, we have to disable the button so that user will not be able to select the start button again. So I will set this false. And once we have pressed the start, our next turn is to stop the counter. So obviously we have to enable the button stop. So I will enable the button stop. Other than this, the same thing, but there is bit extra code that is added here. What is that? When I start the button, counter should start, right? So I will initialize counter. We have already initialized to 0, but still we will reinitialize because at every time the counter start button we click, the counter should start from 1. So that is why we are initializing C is equal to 0, and we will start the counter. How to start the counter? I will call new my counter dot start. Okay. So we are creating new my counter dot start. So when we have a method start, we have understood that my counter as a thread. So we will write the code related to this thread. Since my counter is something that we have created, so it throws an error, you just click on it, create an inner class of my counter, but still start as showing an error because it is a function that is related with respect to threads. So what I will do, I will tell implements thread. So implements is for interface. Since it is on class, I will write extends thread. So that start error is eliminated. So we should also create a run method there. So let me check if it shows any suggestion. No, it's okay. We will write public void run. So use this method. Inside this delete super dot run. Instead of that, see, this is another thread we are creating in an application. So basically what is happening here is whenever we start an application, there will be always a main thread or UI thread which will be running continuously in a looper, which handles like all the UI components and activity services with respect to that. And hence we are creating one more thread inside it, which will help us to create a counter and increment it. Whenever we increment using handlers, we send those messages to a main looper to display that in UI component. So how to do that is, this thread should run only when we have set the counter on, that is B start is pressed. So that is why we have used Boolean R here. So using that as our condition, I will check while R, that is if counter as starting, then only I have to increment every time and I should be able to send the messages using handler. So if that is true, I will increment C++. If you have seen, we have initialized counter to 0, but we have to display starting from 1. So we are incrementing first and using the handler class methods. So since that is not showing, let me write its handler first. So that is before I call that or use the object with respect to handler, use a handler class and create an object handler. Inside this, we call looper dot get main looper. It will auto suggest. You just select the first one, which is nothing but it is something like I told you, the main looper which will be running. It is an infinite loop which sends the task to get executed. inside this, use public void handle message method. So which will auto suggest with super handle message dot message. We do not require that. So delete that and write which one we are supposed to handle the message with. That is whatever there in the CT that we are updating. So use that CT text view and set text of what it has to set. It has to set to string dot string class dot value of which one, whatever it has been received. So that I will call it as message dot what refers to here like int, and this expects us to end with an semicolon. And once we have used the handler class and created an app object, now if I come back to here, I can use this now handler object, handler, and we will use send empty message method. What are we sending? That is the counter value that we have incremented. So that we will use C there and semicolon. Once it has sent, the thread should loop for 1 second infinitely so that it will not send next counter value immediately. So for that, what we will do, inside a try block, we will make thread to sleep for 1 second. So use thread class dot call sleep method and write 1000. It will automatically add millis beside it. We are not typing it. And once we have done, why it is showing error? Because we have not written catch block. So it will auto suggest, right? Include that and delete this. So this completes our counter application. So what are we doing is, whenever we start with an application, already the main UI thread will be running, doing the task. We cannot interrupt that directly to increment and print on the UI design, that is counter value, that is text view. So what are we doing? We are creating one more thread, which is called as my counter. And this job is just to increment and send this to our main loop, that is main thread. How to send? We cannot send it directly. So it has to send as an runnable object itself. So which is done using through handler class and respective methods. So this gives us complete counter application completed. Thank you. Let me minimize this, come out of this presentation mode so that we can run the application and look into the output. So this is how our application looks like. At the starting, both buttons are enabled. When I click on start, the counter starts from 1, and at the same time, You can look into this. B start is, sorry, we have started, right? Coming with this, B start is disabled. B stop, that is stop button, is enabled. When I stop the counter, you can see start button is enabled and stop button is disabled. So this is how our application works.